afternoon.
Afternoon.
Just a factual question. Could you just give an indication of how the lending rate has changed over the last sort of 10 years since the financial crisis, and how you see that?
To small businesses?
To small businesses, yeah.
Well, I'd consider the last few years it's gone up, but in the last year to April it's flat.
So what's the number?
Well, I don't know the specific number over the last.
I'm not trying to trick you. I don't know the number either.
Well, I know, but I can write to you.
I thought you could educate
Well,
us.
I obviously spend a lot of time preparing for these, but I can't sort of give you the exact figure.
It's raw.
So the stock of lending is 165.
Yeah. Say that again.
The total stock of lending, so the stock, not the flow, is 165 billion a year.
165 billion a year.
Yeah. The flow of lending each month is around 5 billion a year, but obviously that is offset by repayments.
And this is to SMEs as.
That's to SMEs.
Yeah.
SMEs, and that's now. And do you know what it was in around the time of the crisis?
So it's been rising for the last few years.
Yeah.
It dipped immediately after the financial crisis, but it's yes, as of April 2018, it was 0% year on year.
Okay, great. The reason why I ask is just to get a sense of, obviously the banks, these debates have happened for quite a long time. The last time I was on the Treasury Committee,
Yeah.
it was a perennial challenge for ministers as well as this committee to try and keep the pressure on for lending. So that's really important. The second thing is around regulation of. I mean, you mentioned, Minister, the new areas where people get new kinds of platforms to go to, and the Treasury is putting money into some of those platforms. What's your view on how well they should be, how well they are being regulated? And certainly in the States, what we picked up was that some kinds of lending is moving from the traditional banking sector elsewhere, particularly around housing funding as well, not directly relevant to SME, but just in terms of the wider landscape. Do you think we should be looking at some of this? Are you looking at some of these trends, and should there be regulation there?
What I would say is that the move towards invoice financing, asset financing, peer-to-peer lending is happening, but it's happening, and we have seen rises of asset finances up 12% last year. We saw
I suppose my question is, are there risks there that are currently covered by the current regulatory framework, or are you looking at new arrangements that need to be put in place to offset any risks? I don't know if anyone else.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I think, there's certainly, peer-to-peer would be an example where it was identified that the current regulatory framework didn't work, so we created a bespoke regulatory regime which both allowed peer-to-peer to grow in a sort of conducive environment, but also put in place the necessary protections for consumers in terms of separating client money and making sure the platforms are holding capital in terms of kind of the marketing and the promotion of those products. So that was definitely an area where we identified risk.
And what about small businesses if they're doing it, if they're borrowing through these new ways? And I'll come on to regulation.
Well, so peer-to-peer is only within the regulatory perimeter if one side of the equation, either borrower or lender, is an individual as opposed to a small business. But of course, if one side of that equation is a small business and the other side is an individual, they will benefit from those protections.
Okay. So on the and onto regulation and protection to small businesses. Certainly, in the past, it was felt that small businesses didn't need to be brought under the regulatory framework, but that view is changing. And the head of the FCA recently said that to this committee that experience has shown that it's not justified to expect small businesses to fend for themselves, and you've already talked about RBS, GRG, and other scandals like HBOS Reading. Do you think that we need to bring small businesses into the regulatory framework, and what work's going on to, is there a difference of view between the Treasury and FCA in terms of direction of travel?
Well, I think it goes back to these 4 significant pieces of work that were underway, because we do want to get a fuller sense of the APPG. I mean, it's not bad. If I may just answer this, in terms of the FOS and the extension, that would be bringing in terms of a redress scheme essentially to vastly enhance numbers of SMEs. And that would be a very meaningful mechanism.
And
for them to be
you'll
able to
change the
access.
compensation cap. You'll lift the compensation cap.
Well, it wouldn't be for me to change, but I've indicated my concern that
you
it
would
should be
recommend-
raised.
yeah.
It needs to be looked at very carefully because it will be
And
inadequate.
you'll keep an open mind about the point Charlie was making. The tribunal. Can I just ask if legislation was needed after these reviews? When should we expect to see the Treasury putting this into the legislative timetable?
Will it rather
be later this year or next year?
Well, I think we would aim to make a response. We will make a response in the autumn, and depending on what we decide is necessary and what sort of consultation process we need to make would be determined then.
So it could be anything between like starting later this year with a view to sometime next year?
It would be as soon as possible.
Great. Hopefully while you're in post and not, onto another bigger and better job.
Well, I don't expect to have another job. I'm just saying that, I just look at history. What I'm saying is I want to get on with this. I think it's small businesses are very concerned about it, and I want to get resolve it.
Okay, so I'm just got a couple more questions, Minister. On the issue of compensation for RBS, those affected by RBS, it's about 2.2 million in the compensation scheme for SMEs. That's my understanding. Is that something you're comfortable with? Do you think that's reasonable?
So there's three elements.
They've paid out 2.2 million.
Yeah, no, I think there's more work that needs to be done. I think there's three elements to it. The first element was mandatorily issued.
Yeah.
I think the second one has got, 7 million that's been paid out. The issue that needs more work on, and I've met with the chief executive and expressed my concerns on this, is around the consequential loss, and that is where we need to see more focus. But of course, it's extremely challenging to determine what the consequential loss for some of these businesses were, because obviously the business owner would project a trajectory of growth, and that is a contestable narrative, and it is very difficult to resolve.
So some of the sessions, in one of the sessions we had witnesses who are affected. We have one in the room, in the committee. One of them who was affected, and he spent over £800,000 trying to, again, on legal action, legal fees against his bank. And his advice to someone else who came along was, don't bother, because they're going to beat you down.
Well, this is exactly the sort of issue that I spoke about earlier.
Yes.
That where the mechanism for banks, for businesses over a certain size, seems to be that they get sucked into a legal dispute and then get offered a one-off, no culpability outcome, which they sort of are led to take because their advisors say, well, this is the best chance you've got, otherwise it's going to drag on and on. I don't think that this is the ideal situation to be in at all. And beyond, RBS and GRG, this is something that I think is not doing the reputation of big banks any favours at all.
So who is driving the battle for making sure that the power balance is shifted? Because you mentioned earlier that it was, it was in numbers, it's a small number who are affected by RBS, but some people, it's driven them to suicide, as you know, and some people have lost everything. A number of people have lost everything. And it's indicative of a bigger problem. Obviously, you've seen some of the other sessions that we've had, more recent cases with I think it was Lloyd's TSB, and others, where small businesses will be caught up in that period of in that situation with over 100,000 people who are still waiting, but 75% who are still waiting for their issues to be resolved with bank accounts. There is a trend here. And it's still, you made the point correctly that banks have got this reputation and people shouldn't judge them. But when all these scandals are there and the power balance is still with the banks, not the citizens or the small businesses, and the government and the regulators take years and years to fix these problems. It's how many years since RBS? Many, many years. The public just doesn't have confidence in government ministers, whoever they are, or the regulators, to get this sorted out so that they get redress. That's the issue. So can you give us an assurance that you are going to actually, while you're in that post for as long as you are, you're going to, day and night, you're going to make this happen and get this sorted? Because it's just going on, and
Sure.
people are suffering.
Well, I acknowledge what you've said to be absolutely true, and the two debates we've had during my tenure and the individual cases I've seen, including members of the committee, are appalling. There's been poor leadership, there's been criminal behaviour, and there's been things that should never have happened. The redress scheme specifically, in terms of GRG, I've acted to secure, I hope, an acceleration and resolution of some of those matters. That has thrown up a whole issue around how we resolve the future orientation of a mechanism for small businesses to be able to access quick redress. And as I've indicated, these 4 strands of work come together in the autumn, and I'm very eager to find a solution that works and avoids repetition of the sorts of appalling behaviour that we've seen.
And you're prepared to work with this committee to make sure that...
Well, I've made myself available frequently.
Good. Thank you. So my last question is about Brexit.
Yeah.
94% of SMEs believe that the government, according to Moore Stevens, hush, Charlie, stop. Steve, the government is ignoring their concerns about Brexit, and 38% of SMEs said that the introduction of trade tariffs was their biggest concern. So, do you think that MaxVac or a customs partnership system will help alleviate those concerns? And what discussions have you had with them? And does this resonate?
Well, I mean, I recognise the concerns of business. I visited a business in my own constituency on Friday where I met 7 members of staff from 7 different countries, and they produce, a few minutes walk from Salisbury Station, all the salt and pepper sachets for Burger King globally, but not in the UK. That clearly necessitates lots of cross-border transactions, and I do fully acknowledge that the uncertainty that exists needs to be resolved, and the government will be very clear that we're going to seek to resolve that through the processes ahead this week and into the autumn. Now, in terms of the custom arrangements, that's not something that I am engaged with. I'm responsible for financial services, and the Chancellor set out on the 7th of March, as you know, a very clear prescription of what we need in financial services in order to get to the outcome that we wish, based on an understanding of that we are in a similar position, or identical position at the moment in terms of regulation, in terms of mutual recognition. We have seen some recognition from the Commission that services will need to form part of the outcome and the negotiation, but we haven't seen a viable alternative with respect to enhanced equivalence regime. So all I would say is that we are actively working with colleagues across government, and all officials in the Treasury are equally motivated to do the same as me, to come up with the right platform for the negotiations when we engage in due course. I recognise the concern of business, and I recognise the concern of city institutions, and we can only move that forward though when we get into a productive negotiation, and that relies on the EU 27 coming forward as well.
And you recognise the figure that John Thompson set out?
Well, I don't recognise, I don't necessarily not recognise it. I haven't read that particular report, but I do recognise there is concern amongst businessmen, small and large, and in the city, over not getting an outcome that is right for the UK economy.
Now, I don't want to